Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're having a good second Monday of the new year already. And I bring you a special guest to help us bring in that second week, Mr. Dan Baltic, the head of the Nut Army himself. How are you doing today, sir?
Very good. Thank you for having me on, American Elitist. It is an honor and a privilege.
No, the privilege is on mine. I'd love to have you on, especially after reading your book, which is amazing. You should definitely buy that, by the way, if you haven't already.
Thank you, thank
One
you.
of the funniest books I've read, like probably ever, quite frankly, in my entire life.
Thanks.
That's quite a compliment. The only book that's made me just read from like start to finish, without struggling, and because that's the thing with Zoomers. Zoomers have the lowest attention span probably ever in human history. I think they did a
I believe
study
it.
actually where modern humans have a attention span less than the goldfish. Actually, it's like 5 seconds, while the
Wow.
goldfish is 8 seconds. So the decline is very much real. So if a book can do that, capture a Zoomer's attention, you know it's good. And that's why I wanted to have Mr. Dan Baltic on.
Well, great. No, thank you. That's amazing. Whenever I hear that someone read NutCranker and laughed and enjoyed it, as a writer, that's exactly what I want to hear. That's, proof that I did my job right.
For sure, man. So basically, you want to go and go up to a synopsis of the plot for those who aren't aware of Nutcracker.
Absolutely, yeah. So, NutCranker, I've described it as a sort of modern day Confederacy of Dunces. Obviously, that's a circular definition if you don't know Confederacy of Dunces, but it is about a character who probably is familiar to many of us. He's a neat like individual, a edge lord type, very online, incel esque tendencies, and he is fired from his nonprofit job because they discover that he is writing a sort of manifesto, which he calls the project, which is a sort of a treatise that attempts to reevaluate all values, a sort of Nietzschean, prospect. The actual reason why he gets fired is they catch him using his company computer to post one of his essays, an essay entitled "On the Equitable Distribution of Wives." It describes a system called the spousal distribution system, which pairs young ladies with men of good standing. And obviously, one such man of good standing is the protagonist himself, a Spencer Grunhauer. And he, after being fired from his nonprofit job, he kind of spirals. He's in his with his more free time. He writes more of the project. He also in that free time sparks a relationship with a woman he meets through a BDSM dating site called Crystal Clancy, and he is attempting to use sadomasochism to subvert her, and she is a progressive liberal, into the ways of patriarchy. As time goes on, he begins to realize that he himself is the one who is being subverted. He joins her in the women's march. It goes horribly. She eventually leaves him for a Latinx Lothario type character called Enrique. And from there, he just kind of spirals further. It seems as though he's about to go in an Elliot Rodger type direction, but the ending is, it delivers a bit of a twist, a bit of a curveball. And I think it's a twist that everyone seems to enjoy quite a bit.
No, I very much enjoyed it, and the opening of the book, in case you haven't read it, is just like it's like the shot before like a great night. Honestly, it really is that great shot that starts the party, basically. And I'll give you a synopsis of it really quickly because it's just hilarious. So after like we're in the present, he's in jail with his cellmate. And he's like talking about he's having an inner monologue about how much his tax dollars have gone into the cell and how he actually has more of a claim to the cell than his cellmate does. However, he wants to masturbate in the cell. His cellmate, who is a lot more muscular than he is, has told him not to. And he uses that rationalization that he owns the cell to basically do whatever he wants. Decides to go in and do it. And it obviously ends up horribly. The cellmate comes back and sees him in the middle of the act and threatens to rip off his balls. And then we move back to the past. I think it's 2006, where
Yes, yeah.
where Spencer is professing his undying love for his history professor and going on about Achilles and early Greek mythology and heroes, and like how he embodies the hero spirit of the ancient Greeks, and how Nora would just be the perfect queen for him, and how he is her rightful husband already in his mind. And he's already planning to propose to her. Mind you, by the way, I don't think they've ever been on a date one time before this, and she's already married. So his prospects automatically don't look good if you're reading this book. So it's the end of the semester. He goes to a party she's hosting, and he is one of those people who shows up in a suit an hour early, and he brings like really expensive liquor. And he tries to interact with her, tries to warm her up in his mind. And obviously he gets rebuffed as more of his classmates show up. And things aren't going very well for him. And eventually he's like, we need to step on the pedal, because I need to submit why her husband is gone, who's just called Greg. I'm pretty sure he's a chump in real life as well, but that doesn't need to be said. He tries to confront her in the hallway and tries to profess his undying love, and she quickly rebuffs him and tells him to go into the bathroom to beat a nut out. And he takes this as the ultimate, just like rebuff of him and his personality, and then basically, kind of spirals from there. And he's drunk at this point. And one of his other classmates there, who's a jock, obviously, and way more muscular than he is dancing with Nora and puts his hand on her ass, and this like sets him off. He basically like tries to fight this guy. It ends up horribly. He ends up pinned to the ground and is basically humiliated by his entire classmates, and is basically kicked out of the party at that point, after calling her a whore as he leaves. And basically, his final act of trying to revenge Nora is trying pissing on the lawn, but even he can't do that. And that's the opening of the book, which is just a perfect 10 out of 10, honestly.
Thank you.
I'm
Yeah.
praising this book a lot, but you need to go read that book, especially if you're a Zoomer, because you don't read enough.
Thank you.
That's why you need to go read it, to watch why you shouldn't propose to your married professor, in case you're in that situation, which we hope not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I started NutCranker with the Nora scene, the as you're describing, the college scene. Later on, I realized that he was going to go to prison, so I added the prologue where he's in prison, and so I think it like ultimately came out to be like really a great contrast, because he starts off in in his cell jacking off, and he's under like constant threat from his cellmate, a gang member named Tiny, who is not Tiny, and that ends very poorly. The prologue, it suggests that some violence is going to go down, and then we immediately segue into this university environment. Spencer, the main character, the protagonist, Spencer Grunhauer, is a young man, and he's experiencing love's first flush at with this infatuation over his professor.
and obviously that doesn't go very well for him at all, in
No,
the
no, yes.
slightest. In fact, it's even worse than you can imagine. And then we kind of move to more of the present, where he has his NGO job, uh, which he makes the critical mistake of basically writing his manifesto on the company's computer. And of course, he gets exposed by this HR lady, whose name is irrelevant, but basically, he's brought before the company's president, Zachary, and he's having this just like amazing like inner monologue about Zachary and how he's a part of the global Marxist plot to destroy America and the Davos Daddies, which is just one of the best like lines I've ever heard, quite frankly.
Oh,
And then
thanks. Yeah.
he tries to rationalize it too by stating that Zachary and his regime, once he's in charge, he made the king of America, basically, under like a theocratic system. We don't really get that flushed out, but he kind of points to that idea where Zachary could be one of his good middle managers, basically. So maybe Zachary does have a future if Spencer takes over America. We'll have to see. But basically, the tribunal doesn't go very well for him, obviously, because he breached optics on a company computer. And basically, he gets harassed by HR. But of course, he's such a schizo that like he defends his ideas by stating that, well,
Yeah.
I may not agree with these radical ideas, but they sound good in principle.
Absolutely. And that's like one of the key points because as I was writing it, I realized he can just like deny this and he'll probably be fine. And so it got to the point where I'm like, well, how is he even going to get in trouble for this? He could just like deny, deny, deny. And then I had it such that the Lori, the HR woman, is talking about how misogynistic his ideas are and hurtful to women. And it just annoys him so much that he bursts out and starts defending the ideas.
Well, at the same time, I feel I admire his courage, much more than like much online schizos who would lie in that situation. But at the same time,
Well, thank you. Yeah.
he kind of ruins his life by basically getting fired from his job, which was paying for his rent in New York City. I believe he's in New
Yeah.
York City or something, or expensive
That's
city,
right.
right? So basically, his income is gone at that stage in the game, and basically, he kind of spirals out for more. If you want to like go into his kind of school shooter arc, where he almost becomes the very thing he hates, what kind of sets him down that road, right? The Davos daddies in his mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he, you know, feels so he's, cheated on by his liberal girlfriend who he was trying to subvert into the ways of patriarchy and such. Doesn't go well. And he, is obviously really angry about getting cucked. And he spirals. He it takes significant steps to complete an Elliot Rodger type journey, but at the critical moment at the end, he pussies out, and he nevertheless winds up, because he's caught with a firearm in a BDSM club. He winds up going to prison, and also because he sent like a manifesto to all these newspapers in conjunction with the act. So, but he doesn't go for very long because he's able to make an argument that he renounced his act in court. So he's not, he doesn't go down for attempted murder. He just goes down on a gun charge. He gets out, and at the end, the twist ending is that he becomes a de-radicalization speaker, and he becomes famous and rich because he talks about how we need to de-radicalize young white men.
Yeah, he basically becomes almost this like Dave Rubin like grifter,
Exactly. Yeah.
basically, except for like school shooters, which is kind of an interesting path for Mr.
Yeah.
Spencer to take, especially knowing how autistic he is. He claims to cling to his principles of based equitable distribution of women, um, and clinging on to his traditional vision of America. But kind of moving past that, which is an amazing book.
Oh, thank
Obviously,
you.
the title of the stream is "What is Traditionally Horny" by Dan Baltic, and this is quite an interesting article. So, can you introduce us to this topic of traditionally horny? Because I'm not aware of this.
Absolutely. So I wrote a Substack piece on my Substack, Baltic State, danbaltic.substack.com, an essay entitled "Traditionally Horny," and so in this essay, I describe how in the modern, the current year, what have you, the stuff that is marketed to men by the media to make them horny obviously is not stuff that's actually going to make them horny. It's like, on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, you have Martha Stewart, you have transsexuals, you have, it's not the stuff that men generally like or want. And so what I in the essay posit has kind of happened here is that we used to have a virtuous popular culture, a virtuous mainstream culture, and a sort of horny and degenerate counterculture, um, which embodies this sort of ratio that makes sense and is like healthy for society, where you have a culture that like generally holds up traditional norms, and to some extent those traditional norms, like I think like the swimsuit editions of old, like Rebecca Romaine on the beach, like that is there's nothing really wrong with that. Some people in the essay, I argue, would say that it's a sort of way station that on the way to the degenerate outcomes that we have today. But I would say that you do actually, if you're going to if the sexuality that you model is uh, the type of sexuality that usually leads to happy families eventually, men and women getting together, eh, that's not a bad thing, depending on exactly how it's done. But regardless of that, there is a sort of inversion that is happening today, where there, instead of a virtuous popular culture and a degenerate counterculture, you have a degenerate popular culture and a trad or virtuous counterculture. And that just doesn't really work very well for society because obviously having a degenerate society doesn't, work very well. And having a kind of like a, yes, it's good to, uphold the values that lead to, healthy families and such, but to have that as the counterculture, that it doesn't really work as well as a counterculture. It's supposed to be the mainstream culture, and the counterculture is generally something that is more rebellious, pushes the boundaries, what have serves as like a release valve for society, and it's kind of kept in the dark or whatever. And now today we have in the dark the kind of traditional culture that we once was more popular, mainstream. And in the mainstream itself, you have a sort of hyper pornographic degeneracy, which itself is, because it is so widespread, so kind of not no longer taboo at all. That just kind of renders it, to the extent it would even have any allure in the first place, it saps the kind of rebellious allure that such things would have if they were a taboo breaking counterculture.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah, I think that's very much true, especially in our age, where basically the archetype is the Coomer. That is like basically 90% of people in our
Yeah.
day and age. I mean, it's so mainstream that like it even has a new term in the dictionary. You know, where you go gooning, basically. That's a new term, basically, that was invented. That's how mainstream it is
Yeah.
at this stage in the game. So, of course, it has its own, like, meme archetype, basically, at this stage in the game. None of which being positive, obviously, for very valid reasons there. Um,
Yeah. I
and
think
all,
there's a real generational divide here too, because as we were talking offline before the episode started, I'm like an elder millennial, you're a Zoomer. When I was, in my teenage years and such, like, oh, the internet was just like starting, or not just starting, but like just being popularly used or accepted. So this sort of like there, no one was gooning. There just wasn't, that wasn't a thing because you didn't have this like high speed pornography. It was just kind of more, you would even like rely on your memory. You would there were actual like magazines and such, and like anything that you like downloaded, it like took like a minute for an image to download. So I mean that, I think that is actually kind of in a weird way preserved a certain level of sexual sanity. Whereas the kind of like, yes, the kind of high speed availability of all of this, and indeed, but I think even more than that, probably a culture. It's, I, in a tweet, I once put it in some fashion that um, everyone is like, cumin, but no one is horny. And I think there's something to that, in that there's just this sort of race to the bottom with regard to just like people using the internet to kind of stimulate their minds or whatever, and race to the bottom of whatever, kinks or, or such things, get them going. But the actual kind of like vital part of arousal, the kind of like, well, I really like some like hot girl, I want to go out and meet her tonight, I want to get laid or whatever, like that is like, you know this has become a sort of like substitute for that. And in a weird way, the you know the rise of all of this technology and such has coincided, of course, with the advancement of hypergamy and all of these things, which has led to a sort of it's become harder and harder for men to get what I got when I was younger. And I, can imagine that like this new generation is just like, oh, that I can't imagine that, happening. I can't imagine a world where we go out and have sex regularly.
no, it's so massive. It's like a gulf, basically, between you and I. And the way I make this comparison, basically, you had weed, which is like, okay, maybe it's a little bit degenerate, but like, if you get off it for a couple weeks, probably not going to affect you too much. And my generation was basically given meth immediately,
Yeah.
like off the bat, and basically became crack addicts and like permanently effed up your brain essentially, where you can't
Yeah.
like your everything is messed up and like your normal dopamine like around life is messed up, which is why which is why like you have to constantly seek these just like insane like hyper sexualized kinks basically just to get the same high. It's because you're chasing
Yeah.
the same high originally when you first like found this stuff, right?
Yeah. No,
However,
I believe
the
that.
terrible part about this basically, because there's no limit to consumption with cooming, unlike with food or drugs, right? Eventually you do have to stop with those, right? You could theoretically coom all night basically, as
Yeah.
long as you have an internet connection. That's pretty much it. You're good to go. And what that basically does is it saps men's incentive to improve themselves or like go outside, basically. And they kind of just like kind of rot and they stay in their same place, right? Because your brain's like, well, we're being rewarded insanely with all these women, right? Because your brain can't tell the difference. So why do we have to change? We're doing so great, right? So there's no work. You don't have to go outside. You don't have to get uncomfortable, right? You don't have to leave your like comfy gaming chair with your Cheetos, right? You don't have to
Absolutely.
do any of that to like go out on a date and possibly get rejected. You could just like download something on, somewhere on the website basically, right? Or go to the hub, right? And like so
Absolutely.
basically you have meth on like 24 access. So it's like trying to go from soda to water when you've been raised on soda your entire life. It's insanely difficult, and most people are too weak, unwilling to change, and basically that's going to be them for the rest of their life, basically, and that's why this stuff is poisonous. This like modern um,
Yeah.
horniness is poison because it's not really horniness. It's basically an addiction, right? It's like hijacking your natural instincts, right? And we know why they're doing it. There's obviously a political agenda behind it.
Yeah.
However, at the same time, like it's basically kind of ruining your life because as a man, like this is one of your biggest motivations in life, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
what motivates you go to the gym at like 12 o'clock when you're tired and don't want to go lift like 50 pounds of dumbbells, right? Is it because you just want to go to the gym to impress your friends on Twitter? Or is it because there's a hot woman that you want to impress, right? I think we know the reason why for a lot of this stuff,
Oh,
right?
totally. Yeah.
However, if you're just like, well, I can just go goon. I don't have to. Well, okay, well then you're not going to go to the gym. It's just not going to happen. Like the odds of that are basically like 1%. And
Yeah.
that's how most men are. And that's why so many people on our side and rightfully are like, this stuff is poison. It needs to be banned. I agree with that. However, we have to account for human nature for how it is. So I think you bring up a valid point with like some of this like what magazines like traditional forms of cooming. There's like
Yeah.
traditional forms of cooming now and like the modern stuff. But there definitely needs to be restriction on it. But the
Yeah.
modern
Like you
stuff is
just
just pure poison. Like there's nothing good about it in the slightest at all. There's nothing.
Yeah, you just wouldn't be doing it for like an hour or 2 hours back in the day. Like it wouldn't make sense. You're there with like a magazine. You're not gonna be like staring at this magazine for 2 hours. I mean the issue one of the issues is obviously it's a rabbit hole type thing where like there's another video, what have you, and then suddenly like hours go by or whatever, and that not only is a sap on your arousal, it's a sap on your time. Like that's time you could have done other stuff. And like I can't imagine. So I mean, like I didn't grow up with this really, but like if this is like when you were like a teenager and a young man, this was like widely available. I I don't know what type of effect that has on your brain as you're growing.
Judging by my generation, who is like 60% gay or something and trans, like absolutely civilizationally ending, unironically posting,
Yeah.
unironically civilizationally ending is what I would have to say about the effects on Gen Z, and Gen A is even worse. Because they're raised from the mess right away. They had no concept of the normal world essentially. That was like nothing. They were already
Yeah.
given the meth right away, so they're even more effed than we are, if that makes sense. If you want a picture for how the
Yeah.
generations basically are and kind of why they act so insane on Twitter and all these things, and why they're so like deracinated basically when you meet them in real life. When you meet Hitler, 3351 in real life, and like obviously you can
Yeah.
imagine what he looks like, and he's probably a Coomer. Just like you don't even have to like guess, like he is. Like
Yeah. No, it's like I can imagine it's I mean also just like the very effect of thinking about yourself in the third person, like obviously this is something if you have like an online persona. So I think about Dan Baltic a lot. I'm not entirely Dan Baltic. I do have another name in life, but important stuff, and it's important to me, literary persona, what have you. But if from the very beginning kind of plugged into this kind of, the good old boys had a pod where they had on this German professor who had a term for it, I think called prophilicity. I forget this guy's name, but it's the kind of the study of how like online profiles have reshaped the way we think about our interactions with the world. And this obviously, if you're kind of introduced to this in midstream, like Facebook wasn't really around until I was 18 or 19. And so I wasn't really thinking about an online profile until then, or, something of that. And even then it was very rudimentary. But if you're thinking about that when you're 13 or when you're, 7, that's got to be really, that must, I would imagine, I'm not a neurologist. I don't know these things, but I would suspect that has some shape, some impact on the development of your personality.
Oh, it 100% does. Like, Gen Z is quite literally the vast majority of us, not the base like 30% of us, but the vast majority, like 60%, are unironically dejects and repulsive in many ways. Quite frankly,
Yeah.
the way we view the world is quite insane and it's just hard to explain if somebody doesn't understand. Like, has been raised this way, I'll say, because when you're raised by basically Gen X parents and like boomers who like had the good life, they lived at the height of the empire basically. Like they
Yeah.
got everything basically on like easy mode, right? And you're Gen, Gen X, you're Gen Z, Gen A, and like things are not going great. Those
No.
promises they promised you aren't coming true. Your GF they promised you if you were just a nice boy you would get didn't materialize.
Yeah.
Like that life you were promised didn't materialize. The country you were raised with is gone. It got replaced with social media. You have no friends. That's gone. No friend groups. That's gone. People don't do things in real life. You don't do that. That's not cool. Uh, even if you tried, like watching a group of like basically deracinated Zoomers trying to interact in real life is quite a spectacle to watch.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Because of how deracinated, basically being raised on meth, we are, and that's what I blame for a lot of this like insanity we see among young people.
Yeah.
Is the way we were raised, number one, by our Gen X and Boomer parents, and number two is basically being like fed meth like immediately. Not all of us, I will say, not all of us were raised on meth right away. However, the floodgates opened up in the early 2000s. Basically, at that point, you were on
Yeah.
it. One way or another. You're gonna get exposed to this one way. It's inevitability. It's not a what if.
Yeah.
It's an inevitability about when it's gonna happen. And so
I mean
that's
it.
why Gen Z is so insane. Is
Yeah.
why that's why
It
right there.
coincided, obviously, and to some extent not even coincided. I think they go hand in glove. The kind of rapid development of social media and the internet as we know it today, with the progress of these various social agendas. And so, in NutCranker, Spencer is contending with the Davos daddies and the global Marxists, and that's a bit tongue in cheek, but like I mean, truly, the social agendas that rule the day are highly dysgenic, and just from hypergamy to the what I'll broadly term race Bolshevism, stuff of that nature. It's very so for this stuff to go coincide with the kind of the meth as you describe it, the kind of turbo social media is I would imagine, and it certainly seems to be a deadly cocktail, a recipe for disaster.
Oh yeah, it's like basically a freight train like basically slipping its rails. Like it's a complete just like cluster F, basically on a massive scale with chemicals spilling into the water.
Yeah.
That's Gen Z. That's the perfect model, essentially. So I'm curious, how do you think we can like transition a lot of these like Zoomers and I guess millennials too, because they were getting introduced to this meth as well, but we just got it a lot sooner. How can we transition them? Because obviously most people aren't going to become a base like tradcath who's like loathe their women in like burqas and like not even like exposing their ankles basically. That's not something we could shoot for on a mass scale. So how do you think we transition away from this like meth? How do we like get closer back to the weed? Like how do we like,
Yeah.
kind of level off this stuff?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of twofold. I mean, there's the um, harmful political and social agendas, and the like as the harmful technology and addiction to cumin and such things. So I think that a kind of if we're to like revitalize the youth, but I don't know to what extent this would even work on a mass level or whatever. But I think in on a kind of micro level in one's own life, or and if you're gonna like not indoctrinate, but teach friends or counsel them, I think a recognition of the you don't have to you go to like based world or something, but a recognition of the various political problems of the day. You need to have some form of that, because you have to understand that what's going on in the dating marketplace, right? If you don't even understand what's going on, if you don't understand that feminism has led to this sort of like technological hypergamy, which is just this kind of condition that has like really never existed in human history. Like you need to understand what's happening to kind of elect to choose something else. So yeah, I think, if you're going to develop a program for like deprogramming a Zoomer or an alpha, and a Gen Alpha, and getting them on the right track, it would probably be recognize what's happening in dating, what's happening more broadly politically, just try to do. I mean, this is like I'm doing a live stream right now. I'm on the internet, but try to do real world stuff. Try to, have, meet up with friends, do, join a sports team, join a gym, join, just go out. I mean, honestly, just like go out with friends and, hang out with them and see movies and, do stuff, and develop, pursue a career that will actually serve you well, and will take care of your material needs. That obviously is a gamble, but you got to take your best bet, figure out something, and yeah, just kind of like throw yourself into the actual world. And I do think that, to the extent that, I mean, as strong as the the lure of the internet is, if you have an actual girlfriend, you will, or wife, certainly, you will spend more time, your sexual energies will generally be more focused on her than on the internet. So if and that's not impossible. It's, I mean, it's tough. I freely, like, I wrote NutCranker. I do understand all of the issues. I'm fully woke on hypergamy and all of this stuff. I get it, believe me. But I mean, I do think that there is certainly opportunity to, it's not over. You can, still, you know you still meet women, you still, they're still find a girl.
No, I think that does need to be said because a lot of these Zoomers like sexual life is the hub before, it's like some other, like basically online meth.
Yeah.
And basically, the people who kind of realize they're being controlled fall into two camps. It's either the self improvement guys who eventually do make it and get the trad wife or whatever women suits them, and then there's the black pill, basically, which is growing in
Yeah.
popularity. And here's the problem with the black pill that I see. And basically, it's not that they realize they can't improve; it's that they want to make excuses for why they can't improve.
Yeah.
Oh, women only want the top like 5% of men. I might as well just give up and go back to the meth. It's just easier. Oh,
Yeah.
going outside, it's raining outside. I can't go to the gym right now. I don't want to get wet.
Yeah.
It's not worth it anyway. I can do whatever online. It's not worth it. I can go on Discord. And basically, their ideology is basically just a cover for excuses, honestly. And that's the problem I see with it. And I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of their complaints. I think they're accurate. Yes, women want the top 5%. Yes, things are harder. But guess what? Like, you can either sit back and complain about it and bitch like a girl, which many men will do, or you can actually do something to improve your life and actually have a future so your genes carry on. Because guess what? Eventually, you do grow old, right? And eventually, you get to a point where you can't have kids. So it's like you have like a biological urge to get this done. Like, your ancestors survived 50 generations like in extremely hard conditions, and yet you can't like get off your comfy gaming chair for five
Yeah.
minutes. It's like, guys, like, you have a legacy and ancestors that like are looking down upon you, like, and that's the thing. Like, I think that needs to be said a lot, because like men need to be reminded of like there is a clock lighting and there is responsibility here, and like, yes, things are hard, but like, you gotta understand, past generations of men haven't had it easier either. Like, yes, it was easier to get a woman, but guess what? You also probably died of malaria in like the 1800s, like 90% of the time, right? Or like pneumonia at
Yeah.
like age 54. And like now we're living till 80. So it's like, yes, things aren't very great, but like things aren't all terrible. And that's the problem with the black pill, is it's basically nihilistic like poison and cope, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just not really like I get why the situation is frustrating, of course. This kind of yeah, women are going for the top, you know, 15 to 20% of men, what have you. If you don't fall into that by whatever metric, you're at an extreme disadvantage in the world of like online dating, which is the world we live in, more or less. But that being said, there are, I, I mean, I would imagine there are ways around this. Like, so when I was younger, people would meet in bars, and you didn't have to be like the best looking guy to get a girl in a bar, because like that really was more about personality than looks. I mean, not okay. That's not fair. That's I mean, people would say that's like red pill cope or whatever, and like of course looks are important, but I mean like a powerful personality, like an engaging, like fun, I don't know if alpha is the right word, but just like you know like if you seem like a fun, confident guy, could do pretty well meeting girls in social settings where people want to talk to each other. Now unfortunately we don't live in that world anymore, right? You go to bars today and such, people are on their phones. It's a different environment than when I was younger. That being said, I mean, I don't think things have changed quite all that much. It just means that, like, kind of making the initial approach or whatever has become that much more intimidating, that much harder. I think there's that much more rejection, that much more like you're weird or whatever. But I tend to think that the fewer, guys who are doing this, it to some extent it limits the competition. So if you're like the only guy in the bar who's like trying to talk to women, or if you like try to talk to women in your supermarket or whatever, yeah, a lot of them are going to be like, oh, you're a freak, or the barista is going to like write on a cup like you need to be safe from this guy. I don't know if you saw that meme going around, but yeah, I mean, so there's obviously a lot of BS you have to deal with, but I don't think that you're absolutely going to come up dry if you have like a good personality and you go for it. That being said, like also you can improve yourself, right? You can. So I, as an experiment, back when I was using the apps, I have a girlfriend now, but when I was using them a few years ago, I just like took off my school and my job and everything, and I immediately got like much fewer matches. And so, okay, I mean, to me, what that said was my actually the achievements that I worked hard for, my like my degree, my career, they did matter, and they do matter. So it is possible, I think, to kind of put yourself into a different, dating echelon, or get yourself into the top 15% or whatever by achieving and getting a good job or career, school, like all of these markers of success. So I mean, like, obviously that's not a guarantee. That's not in like a match does not mean you're going home with anyone, but it's something. And it's very much not impossible. I think that the problem with the black pill is it's just it's people who want to are understandably frustrated with the situation, but they are blackpilling. They're like, oh, it can't happen, it's impossible, and it's not really true. It's just the thing is, it's not that it's impossible, it's that it's unpleasant. Is that it's uncomfortable to do all this stuff and to get what you need to get. And at some point you're just like, I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't. And that's true. Yeah, society was, people structured it in a way to make you lose. So that sucks. But it doesn't mean you have to accept it.
No, and it's also like the one guy who has social skills and can talk is probably gonna win, honestly, than the guy who's on his phone, who's probably better looking, look like
Absolutely.
doesn't have any social skills basically. And you can easily do that. And I'm not saying like you can be like a nerd or like a fat guy, but like having something puts you above the rest of the herd. Basically, is all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
But
I mean, I think like confidence is so much when it comes to women. Like I've seen like friends of mine who like leveled up in confidence do so much better, and nothing else had changed at all. It was just suddenly like it clicked for them one day, and they became more confident, and that was all they needed. These are Asian guys I'm talking about.
well, I thought they were like subhuman according to the
Yeah.
internet.
Well, I mean,
Sorry,
on the dating sites, so you would think so, right? But
sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on YouTube,
but yeah, no, I know Asian guys who do pretty well.
but kind of segueing away from Dan Baltic's relationship advice, which I think is very interesting. Um, let's talk about your authorship and kind of why you chose to write NutCranker and like kind of the category you chose to put it in. Because what kind of struck me about this book was like in our sphere, like there's only writers who talk about basically it's like all academics and basically here's why the left owns everything and like why your world sucks and here's elite theory and here's why mass migration is bad and here's
Yeah,
why Karl Marx was evil and here's blah 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 academics. We're gonna quote these philosophers and there's nothing like funny, interesting, or inspiring in like right wing literature at all. Like
mm,
it doesn't exist as a category. Basically, it's all like basically academic books or religious text. Those are the
yeah,
basically two main categories of dissonant right wing, whatever you want to call us, movement. And that's what I really liked about your book, right? Because you're bringing back that category in space for like artist and like artist, good ones, not the cringe ones,
Yeah,
to like
thank you.
bring out this like sphere of creative and like funny work. Because you need that in an age of like extreme black pills, right? To keep people going. Again, a powerful
Absolutely.
laugh can keep a man going for a day. So, what's to say a book who can make a man laugh a million times can inspire a lot. And
Thank you.
that's why I really like your literature, right? Because you're bringing this category, much needed category, into the DR. So can you kind of talk about why you chose? Did you have that in mind that you kind of wanted to bring something into that space, or were you of the mind that like why has nobody chose to write anything funny here?
So I think as like a writer, you know what type of writer you are. You know like what your voice is, what you like to write, what you're good at writing. And yeah, when you set out to write something, I don't think you should really think of it in terms of what am I going to market? What will people want to buy? What am I going to be able to sell people? You should like sit down, write, write, from the heart, write, the stuff that you like to write that makes you something that makes you laugh, or if not laugh, like something that you're really into, you're inspired by it, you enjoy it. And like that is like the literature that you were meant to write. And I've always, since I was, young, I minored in creative writing. I was, always writing fiction, and I always like to write, comic tales, a satiric, fiction. That was what just felt natural to me, what I enjoyed. And so this is, and I appreciate your kind words here. How Nutcranker felt different, and I think to an extent, if it feels different, it's because I had no agenda when I set out to write it. I didn't, even think about it. I didn't know the title. I didn't even really know what it was about. I just sat down and I started writing. I found Spencer's voice, and I used Spencer Grunhauer of Nutcranker to explore, the topics that, yes, that he's interested in, and the stuff that he does, but also just like the stuff I'm interested in, and the issues that intrigue me. So as like a man in the current year, a youngish man, 37, not as young as some, not as old as others, I am intrigued by the relations between the sexes, the place of man in the West and such, the place of the West in the world, what has happened to the West in the world, and all of these things. And so this created a this was the writing was a vehicle to explore these issues, but it's not because I wanted to explore the issues exactly. It's just because that's what interested me, so that's where the writing went. And I think like as long as you sit down, and as long as you start writing, and you write what you want to write, and what you enjoy, what kind of, like, you sit down, you write it, and you walk away and you think like that was fun. I liked that scene. This is something I would want to read. That's the type of writing you're supposed to do. And don't worry at all about whether it fits into some sort of ideological box, because if it does, if you're trying to make it fit into some box, you're constraining it. You're holding yourself back. And the whole part of good art is to actually tell the truth. And so it's you don't want to be thinking about how can I not violate some rules, whether it's from the right or the left. So yeah, if Nutcranker feels different, maybe it's because I truly just put the writing first. I, had no desire to write a horny satire that captures the spirit of the incel or the dissident young man or what have you. I just wanted to write the story of Spencer Grunhauer.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that like puts people off most of modern writing and like art is it's like it's
Yeah.
all run by like just like absolute piles of shit who make
Oh
terrible
yeah.
stuff. And it's also like not only is it terrible number one, which is already negative, it's also like screaming at the top of its lungs how evil, racist, sexist, blah 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 you are. Like that's the entire message, right? And so that's why no
Hmm.
one reads these actual modern books or anything. It's all like a fake industry where
Oh,
corporations buy
absolutely.
books that no one reads and like no one goes to look at modern art. Everyone wants to go look at ancient right. I'll call it like ancient art, which is inherently right wing. Like
Yeah.
someone said this once. Like even if you just make if right now if you wrote a book today and it's actually good and honest, it's going to be right wing. Like
Yeah.
inherently you can't avoid that. That's a fact of reality. And it's not being political. It's just reality, and reality has a right
Yeah.
wing bias to it. Unfortunately, that our enemies on the left won't understand.
Yeah.
And then that's the thing about books, right? And art in general, right? You can post a message. However, if it's terrible, no one wants to look at it or read it. It will never succeed, right? And the only reason modern art or books succeed is just because it's propped up by the system, right? If the system today disappeared, all of that stuff would like go in the dustbin of history, right? Honestly, and I think stuff like you, general artist on our side, some of the stuff Samuel, a couple others are doing with books and art would take over
Yeah.
because it's naturally just better and superior, right? It has an
Well, thank
actual
you. Yeah.
message. It has an actual conversation to it, besides basically like feminist screeching at you, right? Which who wants to listen to that, especially if you're a
Yeah.
man? So that's a plus, and that's what your writing does so well. Um, and I look forward to
Thanks.
more stuff like yours filling that niche in the sphere. I think it's much needed. Um,
Absolutely.
But
Thank
do
you.
you think that's why art is so terrible nowadays, right? It's because like those two factors I mentioned. Do you think there's something else to it that just makes it repulsive inherently? Do you think there's just
Well, I mean, like, so, I mean, obviously, if you're the one who's being targeted by these ideologies, it's going to be especially offensive. But even if you're not, even if you're, I mean, I think there's a reason why all of these like woke remakes of movies fail, all of these like Netflix TV series is that are just like, kind of amalgam of like political, agendas don't pick up steam. It's because even the people who agree with it, it's not entertaining. It's not engaging. It's the type of stuff that is not telling the truth. It's not telling any sort of. It's the same thing that we just talked about. Why art fails if whether from the left or the right, if you're trying to fit it into an ideological box so you don't piss anyone off, that's just not going to be fun. That's not going to be rewarding for the reader. And I mean, that's what we see today in the mainstream media and entertainment industry, because they're obviously producing left wing race Bolshevist propaganda. And that's just like not the type of stuff that, lends itself to good art, because there's this, real, kind of censorious cult model that they have to, sandwich their, cram their stories into. And that, even if you agree with the ideas, you just something that doesn't seem true, something that's written to kind of satisfy a commissar, that's not going to be something that people actually want to listen to or watch. They might say like, "Oh yeah, that was an important show," but they're not actually going to like watching it, and in their heart of hearts, they'll know that it's not good art.
no? It's like the period blood being stained on like a canvas. It's like it's
Yeah,
objectively just like hideous and ugly.
Yeah.
And like the conversation around it is basically just like insane screeching about mythical patriarchy, right? Which is insane, and everyone knows, like in their rational mind, that that doesn't exist. In our modern society, that's quite obvious. Otherwise, that painting would not be up in the Museum of Art in America.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's
However,
the
you
whole like banned books thing, right? Where it's like, we support banned books, and it's like To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's like I read that because I had to in eighth grade because they made us read it. It's not a banned book, I assure you. And stuff of that nature, they want to, and I mean, this is, I think, a smart instinct. They want to insist that we're like, they're the faction of the rebellious, they're the rebel alliance, and they're fighting against the man who is like Donald Trump, and white Christians, and they're the underdog, the scrappy, but it's not true, obviously. And so yeah, I think that actually is, if you want to kind of like tell good stories, I get the incentive, I get the drive to want to be like, we're the cool rebels, but yeah, and it's obviously not true.
no, obviously not. That's always projection, as it always has been throughout all of history with the left. I'll say that broadly, and bio-Leninism in general. And that's the thing about bio-Leninism, right? Is it has to promote just like the absolute just dejects and like absolute bottom of society, because they're the only ones who'll be loyal to the system, right? Because the system put them in positions of power, right? And that's why when you look
Yeah.
at people in key positions and like art, movies, stuff like that, they're all just like dysgenic. Like, I know this is the stereotype, like purple hair feminist fat woman in their 40s who's childless, right? Who went to the Women's March in like 2017 or whatever with the pussy hat, right? And obviously that's the thumbnail of this video. But like, it's these absolute G-Jacks who will never achieve anything, right? It's impossible for them to make anything good, right? So nothing can actually come from that because it's
Yeah,
artificial.
absolutely.
It's a lie inherently, and
Yeah, I mean,
that's yeah.
a
Go ahead.
like an actual good left winger progressive story would be one where like one of these like purple haired women reflects on her like situation and like actually questions like well, I'm getting excited for my friends with benefits date with Chad, and and tries to like convince herself that it's like a rewarding experience, but then goes home and is like actually like questioning, should she settle down with some beta, or something, or maybe she sees like some beta who is getting married and it pisses her off or whatever like that. You need, if you're going to actually have something told from a left-wing perspective, it needs to be self-critical, it needs to be critical of its own, and that could potentially be actually good, actually. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon.
No, especially as Biolinum is the policy of the day, those people are kicked out of the system for being the wrong race to anyway. So it's not
True.
like those competent people will be allowed anyway, as we see they're all being kicked out anyway today.
Yeah,
But with that being said, as we close out the stream, Mr. Dan Baltic, I do have a couple of questions. So,
absolutely.
does Spencer get his ball ripped off? Does that actually happen? Is that canon?
No, yeah. I mean, it's not actually ripped off. Like, I assume like he got like a bad beating or worse. There's allusions at the end to possible prison, customary prison mistreatment that goes on. But no, I don't. His ball does not actually get permanently damaged. He probably got like punched in the nuts a few times, but he's still intact as a man.
It would still be the fault of Davos Daddies, I'm sure, if it was monologued. But
Of
that being
course.
said, my fellow question: is part two coming?
It is, yeah. I've so I do have a day career. I am more busy with that than well, I'm not going to say more busy than I would like to be, because it pays the bills. That's great. It's going well. But in the evenings, I'm writing NutCranker 2. I have almost finished the prologue chapter, and I'll tell your listeners this right now. The prologue to NutCranker 2 is I'm going to debut it on my Substack. I'm going to, every subsequent chapter, I'm going to run it on my Substack. And eventually, when I'm done, I will publish the actual novel. But each chapter will be published serially on my Substack. The prologue is going to feature Spencer as a prominent de-radicalization specialist, and he is living the high life with his girlfriend Margot Weisberg, and he's living it up. And he experiences an encounter which mirrors the encounter between the progressive activist and his Latinx girlfriend in Bedford-Stuyvesant in New York City, where he gets, sadly stabbed to death by a young scholar, the type of man who he would be, want to help. I'm sure we're all familiar with this incident. So in this prologue, Spencer, he has a similar situation. He's leaving a party with his girlfriend, and they encounter such an individual, Spencer Grunhauer, being the practical man that he is, the hero of the West. He grabs his girl and he shoves her into the attacker and tries to run away, hoping that the attacker will just be satisfied with his girl. But this was captured on video and it goes viral. It ruins his career as a de-radicalization speaker, and so he's disgraced, ashamed, and at that point he decides that it's the perfect pivot to enter the Dime Square art scene. So he attempts to become a star in New York City's Dime Square. Spencer Grunhauer.
That sounds like an interesting plot. And is there anything you'd like to promote or show as we close out the stream today to the audience?
Absolutely. So yeah, obviously by NutCranker, that is spelled NutCrank with no E at the end, just R, NutCrank R. You can get it on Amazon or through the publisher Terror House. In addition, go to my Substack, danbaltic.substack.com, subscribe. That's where all the subsequent chapters of NutCranker will debut. And of course, listen to New Right, the podcast I co-host with Matt Pegas. We most recently had Charles Haywood on, and we, in our next episode, which we just recorded over the weekend, we had on Max Teller, who is one of the guys behind White Boy Summer Apparel, WBS Apparel, and I have recently launched a partnership with them. And we have a line of T-shirts called Nut Army Elite. And they're available through WBS's website. Go on there, get your Nut Army Elite T-shirt. Every army needs a uniform. If you want to be in the Nut Army, you got to buy your Nut Army Elite T-shirt.
Definitely. Go do that, support friends. You'll definitely own the libs, for sure. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, remember, the good reset is inevitable. Keep your hopes up. Have a good rest of your night.